In May 1981, Tulsa millionaire Roger Wheeler was murdered. State investigators believe organized crime was behind the hit. In fact, law enforcement officers say mob families across the country are involved in everything from murder to narcotics and prostitution in Oklahoma. Oklahoma County District Attorney Bob Macy told state senators today they need to make strong laws now, or Oklahoma could become another crime stronghold. Fighting crime costs money, but Macy says Oklahomans are already paying the price.
So we're paying. The question is, do we spend the money on fighting organized crime and providing prisons to lock up criminals in, or do we spend it for increased insurance premiums, for increased cost of food, for increased cost of clothing? We're spending the money. It's just, where do we spend it?
Macy says organized crime has their strongest grasp on narcotics in Oklahoma, and that leads to a number of particularly brutal slayings. He fears they'll be involved in racetracks if the state racing laws are not strong ones. In fact, it's strong laws and strong enforcement that Macy says could keep organized crime to a minimum in the state. Charles Schnitzer, Action 4, at the state capitol.
And I've asked for the enactment of a statute that would prohibit nude or semi-nude dancing in any place where any type of alcoholic beverage or beer is sold. I need a state statute because a city ordinance will not cover my entire county, and they would merely move out into the county.
Good morning, Dixon.
Robert Mitchell is a trial attorney. He spends most of his time trying to convince juries his clients should win their lawsuits. 6 days a month, Mitchell becomes a juror himself. As one of 5 pardon and parole board members, he must help decide whether prison inmates should finish their sentences behind bars or on the streets. Having the keys to let inmates out of prison is a heavy responsibility. Mitchell must plow through 500 cases each month. He must weigh the potential benefits of releasing a prisoner against the potential risk to society. Parole board members can feel additional pressure to discharge convicts because of severe prison overcrowding.
We try to judge each individual on the merits of whether or not we think they're going to be a good risk to return to society. And if we don't believe they're a risk to return to society, if we think they might commit another crime, we're not going to parole them, whether there's an overcrowding situation or not. So although we are aware of it, we do not let pressure make our decisions. We try to make them on an individual basis.
Mitchell will probably resign from the parole board before his current 4-year term expires. He's proud of the board's recent record. Less than 1% of the inmates he helped parole will ever see the inside of an Oklahoma prison again. Scott Wallace, Action 4.
Isn't that neat? Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
This is Chief Barker, huh?
Yeah. Oh, I'm just totally excited about it. We have a van at home that has a wheelchair lift, and this will allow us to be able to expand to about a 35-mile radius, bringing in the children in about an hour. Right now it takes us about 2 hours to bring them in, 2 hours to bring them out, and that's too much time.
Glenn Veal's 5 brothers and sisters haven't been together for 44 years. So a few more minutes at an airport gate shouldn't make that much difference. It's a nerve-wracking wait, though. The minutes seem like hours. Older sister Lorraine flew in all the way from California for this reunion. The 5 other brothers and sisters flew in from as far away as Indiana. You see, the family was separated after a divorce in 1939. The children all sent to separate institutions. 44 years later, their love for each other still lives.
I told her that was going to happen. Oh, my God Almighty. Oh, my God. I told her on the plane, the way this family thinks, I know you guys are going to pull that. Didn't I tell you they'd do that?
We were sitting at Glenn's this morning when we called California.
I told her you guys would pull that.
To play on your big sister.
Hey, I tried. You know, all these years.
Is that my brother?
That's George. Oh, God. Stand up, girl. Let's go. Let's go find, you know. Yeah, let's get Carol. All those years don't make a damn. You guys all think alike.
The last time
I said, hey, I drove this far. I'm going to come right on across and we'll get him out of bed.
The hard part of this reunion was getting to Oklahoma City. The easy part will naturally unwind over the next few days.
What are you going to do while you're here?
Talk and drink coffee, I think, and talk and talk. And get acquainted with the family again.
This is my baby sister.
Dan Slocum, Action 4.
The slogan of the 4th annual sorority fundraiser is to shake it well for sickle cell, and that's exactly what the folks are doing. This is kind of a fun time, a celebration for all the work done. The donation required for doing the dancing is only $1, because the majority of the monies raised for the disease come from local businesses and homes. This year, Delta Sigma Theta set a goal of $1,000, and they fully expect to make it. By 8 o'clock this evening, the group had already raised $850, and they still haven't picked up all the donations. To some, that sum may not sound like a big one, but it's hard to get support for sickle cell anemia.
It's hard to raise money for because it happens predominantly in blacks and because people do not know that much about sickle cell. You don't have celebrities supporting sickle cell anemia that much. So our chapter decided to take it up and try and bring more awareness to Oklahoma City.
The doors of the YWCA at Northeast 16th and Eastern will be open till midnight tonight. So if you're in the mood for dancing, come on down and shake it well for sickle cell. Sherry Sellers, Action 4.
When Hitler came to power 50 years ago, the Jewish community in Berlin was vibrant and large, more than 170,000 strong. And then the persecution began, the boycott of Jewish businesses, the arrest of Jewish leaders, and a final solution. Hitler lit the fire that would become a Holocaust. There are now major exhibitions in Berlin. They include photographs of Nazi stormtroopers parading through the streets of Berlin on the night that Hitler took charge. The exhibitions are not designed to smooth over the past, but to expose the horror which took place so that Germans will never forget. Could another Holocaust happen? Despite evidence that the Nazi movement is still active, most Germans think not. They say the neo-Nazis number no more than a few hundred and pose no serious threat to the German state. Kurt Autry, Action 4.
The big rigs are still rolling along Oklahoma's highways, but no one knows how long that'll last. Independent truckers are fed up with the hike in highway user taxes. Several independent unions called for drivers to strike last night. They figure a shutdown would bring the nation to its knees and force politicians to repeal the highway tax increase.
Yeah, I just want enough fuel to go home.
Independent driver Joe Pike usually crisscrosses the country hauling glass, mud, or canned goods. He's empty now. He stopped in Oklahoma City to get enough diesel to make it home.
I can't stay out long. 2 weeks put me out of business. I've got to, I hope they can settle this within 2 weeks. If they don't, I'm just going to turn my truck back in because I can't pay for it. And if they don't get something straightened out on this tax, well, I'm going to go broke anyway.
Many independents don't want to strike, but they plan to keep off the roads because they're afraid of violence against non-strikers.
Because I'm not going to be out there running and taking a chance on getting shot at or my truck damaged or getting me hurt, because it's not worth me getting hurt when everybody else goes on strike. If they shut down, I shut down too.
During the last strike, we had one driver had a rock dropped off and it came through his windshield. And it was almost put him off the road. And there has been people killed that way.
Most of the truck drivers we spoke with have adopted a wait-and-see attitude. They'll take these rigs home and wait to see how long the strike continues and to see if they're going to go broke. Scott Wallace, Action 4 along I-35. Hennessy residents woke up to a 3-inch snowfall. A lot of people didn't even bother to drive to work today. Snowplows fought a losing battle to help keep the roads clear for the people who did drive to work. The howling wind would recover the highway just about the time graders pushed the snowdrifts aside. Snowplow driver David Lewis got into a pickle. He swerved to avoid a skidding car and landed in a ditch. His plow will have to wait for a thaw. It was a long day for Lewis. It was also a long day for rancher Donnie Miller. His cattle needed special attention after a bitter night of rain and snow. Times are tough on ranchers, even when the weather's good.
I'm going to say at least double your expenses anyway, and this year is even worse on account of the wheat pasture. No wheat pasture, and every bit of food we give them in this area is strictly out of a stockpile.
But the worst storm of the season was not all gloom for Hennessy. The blizzard forced school to shut down. We found 3 Hennessyans taking advantage of what Mother Nature had delivered. Scott Wallace, Action 4 in Hennessy.
Of Oklahoma, their constitutional
Senator Bernice Shedrick authored the Oklahoma Natural Death Act the last 2 times it has been before the Senate. The act would allow a person to specify in a will that extraordinary means should not be undertaken to keep them alive if 2 doctors confirm their condition is terminal and irreversible. Today, Shedrick told senators that 75% of the time the act isn't needed, but she wants to protect the other 25% of the cases. Opponents said the act is never needed.
I feel like we're fixing to try to fix something that's not broke, that we have the authority, the physicians tell us that, and it seems like in addition now to the family and the doctor, we say we need to add the legal aspect. I think that we have the potential to do this already.
As I mentioned to you earlier, there are 14 other states who have the Natural Death Act. It has not created an unlimitless amount of litigation. But by the same token, the elderly people in the state of Oklahoma pay $9 million more a year out-of-pocket money for medical expenses than their counterparts in surrounding areas. And I ask you this, have we as legislators met their need? Have we just turned a deaf ear and said, if the wheel's not broke, don't try to fix it?
The Senate rejected the act again by a 19-28 vote. Shedrick says she may recall the issue later in the year. Charles Schnetzer, Action 4 at the state capitol. The problem is cash flow. The state cannot spend any more money than they receive, and for the past 4 months, Oklahoma hasn't received enough money to meet its monthly allocations. Revenue collections have followed a historic pattern so far, and if the pattern continues, the worst is yet to come, with a possible shortfall in March of 25%.
If something doesn't happen to relieve the institutions of their cash flow needs in April, that there could be layoffs, and that's what we're worried about. That would be a pretty dramatic thing to have happen in institutions of higher education. I don't think that's necessary. There are ways that we can deal with that if everyone will just be calm and utilize the funds that are available.
Details of the plan Deatherage and other lawmakers are working on aren't complete, but there are several pots from which the state could borrow. Funds paid under protest to the Insurance Commission, for example, that the state can't spend but might be able to borrow. Construction money set aside for the universities or the Corrections Department Administration Building, the Water Fund, the Pension Fund, or interest earned on any of them. The money would be repaid when revenues are traditionally higher. Senate leaders admit they are thinking along the same lines, but they do not want to discuss their plans until they are more detailed. Charles Schnitzer, Action 4, at the state capitol.
Should there be a further reduction in crude oil price, that won't necessarily be seen as lower prices at the pump. All that crude oil price reduction will do is bring the cost of crude oil more in line with the already depressed price of gasoline. And then we realize that April the 1st of this year, there'll be a 5-cent increase in the federal excise tax from 4 cents a gallon to 9 cents a gallon, and that 5-cent increase will have to be borne by consumers at the pump. Also,
we'll be talking about funding for Oklahoma State University, and we'll be talking about our county governments and corrections that need to be made in the laws that were passed last year. So these will be items that will be of main concern within the state of Oklahoma and that we will be dealing with in the upcoming legislature that's now in session here at State Capitol.
South Nader River Bridge east of Thomas is very similar to the previous item. The existing bridge is traffic volume 1,600 vehicles per day with a considerable number of large commercial vehicles. Part E of the item is in District 7 in Ellis County on the... Aye. Aye. Aye.
Being out of work plagues many Oklahomans, particularly blacks. From 1981 to 1982, black unemployment rose 4.5% nationally, but 6% in Oklahoma. Financially, that made 1982 one of the worst years in a decade for the black population. Currently, 14% of the state's black workforce is out of work.
When we look at the black community, we find that the unemployment rate is double that for whites. That currently we have a 5.9% unemployment overall, and for blacks is that we are talking about a 14% unemployment. For black youth is that we are talking about in excess of 20% of black teenagers not being able to find any kind of employment in the workforce.
Benton says Oklahoma's black unemployment figures are higher than the national average because the state's black workforce is also higher. He says the black community isn't in a recession, they're in a depression. Debbie Mash, Action 4 in Northeast Oklahoma City.
Item. The resolution is approved.
It may be the only tool that I would caution.
35 Northwest 24th Street.
It's been a while, so it's got to seem it's been a while for me.
Taught me all of it one way or the other. They felt that after all secretaries, I would certainly...
If they have suffered, they haven't said so. In fact, they have been involved at times during campaigns, and they have, of course, heard me discuss some of the issues that came before the city. So I think they feel that they've had an involvement.
Your explanation will be questions. Yield Senator Shoeline. He yields.
Senator Roselle.
He yields.
The facts are there are some school districts that may be in a financial dilemma before the end of this school year. The facts are, unless our economic condition changes, there are going to be some more school districts next year that are going to be in an economic dilemma, and they're going to be forced to accept additional alternatives. This is but one alternative.
And you'd think that we were way ahead of them in technology. They've got more nuclear submarines. Land, a fog was blowing across the runway, and the autopilot didn't work or something. And it said,
Greg came out to the New Jersey.
Oh, yeah. The average John Q. citizen, because he doesn't understand the threat. If you don't really understand the threat to the country and the commitments the country has through treaties and the expanse of the ocean, if you will, it's hard to understand $239 billion in a 1984 defense bill. I mean, that just... And besides, $1 billion is out of sight anyhow. You know, who ever heard of $1 billion? So I think those 2 points, that it's hard to conceive of a threat you can't see, and it's hard to conceive of that much money and how it's spent.
It heats up through the greenhouse, and it heats itself rather than most houses has the windows facing the wrong direction. This house has to set to the south, and most of the glass is to the south, and then it will heat itself.
The
The people attending the tourism convention are from state lodges, restaurants, camping grounds, you name it, anyone who makes money from tourists. The guest speaker was a man who is well accustomed to tourists because he houses them. William Edwards, the president of the Hilton Hotels division. Mr. Edwards is also a member of the Travel Industry Association of America. He told the group travel is down. He said states are going to have to come up with more money to keep their tourism industry afloat. He says this year the government is only recommending a $5 million budget for tourism compared to other countries that spend 10 times as much. But he said Oklahoma is not doing that bad.
The Oklahoma Tourism and Recreation Board has a budget of $3.7 million and ranks 17th out of 50 states. So you must say that if the average budget for all the states across the country was $2.5 million, which it is, that's a very good budget and you're in good shape.
Edwards said the purpose of the convention was to educate people on the importance of tourism because it creates tax revenues. For every dollar spent, $19 are earned. Bella Shaw, Action 4 at the Skirvin Plaza.
Let's look at it. Jason, all right, pick up your paper and let's look at the pictures. Okay, hands up high, toy box, toolbox.
I've been at another school where the situation was ideal, but they pulled me from there and put me here. And this is certainly not a good situation for the students or for the teachers. And I feel like if the parents were aware of what was going on, they would object.
All of these things, you have to come back.
For the first time in over a decade, we saw an increase in enrollment, and we were projecting that increase to continue.
You know, so often people think, well, it isn't going to happen to me. I'm immune to that. Well, I found out that you aren't immune.
Like Ruth Miller found out in 1981, this past year an estimated 123,000 Americans learned that they too had colorectal cancer. And an estimated 57,000 people died of the disease. When you look at the combined death rate for both sexes, you see cancer of the colon and rectum second only to lung cancer. Doctors say in spite of much improved detection tools and treatment, the death rate for both men and women with colorectal cancer has virtually stayed the same.
We're not detecting the disease early enough. A far majority of the people we see are in trouble, and a lot of those people will not be cured.
Bob Hengel's cancer was detected after what he thought was a nervous stomach grew painful. 2 years after extensive surgery, Hengel says he's healthy and lives a relatively normal life. But he does so without part of his colon and rectum. During surgery, his doctor created an opening in his abdominal wall, a colostomy, to allow for elimination of body waste.
I'm certain that if I had had an annual physical, as many people do and as is recommended, that they might have found it sooner.
More than 90% of the people who get cancer of the colon and rectum are past 40 years of age. Doctors say at highest risk are those with a family history of colon cancer, people with ulcerative colitis, and people with a history of colon polyps. According to the American Cancer Society, men and women are affected in almost equal numbers. Tomorrow, we'll look at the detection of colorectal cancer. I'm Sherry Sellers. Two years ago, this man died of cancer at the age of 34. He was a nurse. Many in his family had had cancer, so he was no stranger to the disease. His wife says that after his surgery for colon cancer, his coworkers said he must have known something was wrong.
Usually they have had some sort of symptoms that they haven't paid attention to because feel like it's due to something that's not serious, and they have delayed seeing a doctor.
People are usually in trouble by the time they get here. And this is why we now are making a major effort to try to detect cancer before the symptoms arise.
This is the old method of detection, the rigid proctosigmoidoscope. In many doctors' offices, it's been replaced with a new kind, a flexible kind.
It's much less painful to the patient, and also we can look much further up in the colon than we could in the past. The flexible sigmoidoscope can detect 75% of colon cancers.
Another new advance is a simple at-home test for hidden blood in the stool, the Hemocolt slide test. It's recommended for those over 50 and is available at your doctor's office. The test can signal your physician that something is wrong. Tomorrow, ways to prevent colorectal cancer. I'm Sherry Sellers. The American Cancer Society says there's evidence that colon cancer may be linked to environmental factors, such as diet. Some scientists believe that our American menus are high in beef and low in high-fiber foods. Things like bran, apples, and lettuce may be a significant factor. Compare us to the Japanese. They eat a diet high in fiber, low in red meat. Of course, one reason for that may be that beef prices over there are 6 times higher than what we pay over here.
People in Japan have a very low incidence of colorectal cancer as compared to Americans. But we find when we take the Japanese from Japan, nationalize them in America, that their rates then become, after about 10 years, the same rates that we have of incidence of colorectal cancer. We feel that's because of the diets. Well, we feel that there are certain carcinogens or chemicals that cause cancer, causes cells within the lining of the rectum and the colon to become cancer. And we feel that in patients who are people who are constipated, that these carcinogens or these chemicals can stay in contact with the lining of the bowel much longer than who people have normal soft stools each day.
For now, the link between diet and colorectal cancer remains a theory, but the American Cancer Society does have some recommendations. Number 1, eat a high-fiber, low-residue diet. Number 2, have an annual rectal examination after age 40. Number 3, after age 50, take an annual Hemocolt slide test for hidden blood in the stool. The Cancer Society also recommends that you have an annual proctosigmoidoscope exam.
And a lot of people do not want to have the sigmoidoscopy done, and I negotiate with them. I tell them the pros of it and the cons of it, and why I think it's important, and if they say they don't want it done, that's their prerogative.
It could mean the difference between life and death.
Absolutely.
I'm Sherry Sellers.